There is a person in your life right now who does not want you to succeed. They know your name. They know your plans. They know your insecurities. They have sat across from you at a table and smiled. They have asked how things are going and listened carefully while you answered. They have offered advice that sounded helpful and encouragement that sounded genuine. And they are working against you. Not necessarily with dramatic gestures. Not with obvious hostility that you could point to and name. But quietly. Consistently, in the small decisions they make about what information to share with others about you. In the way they frame your failures in conversations you are not present for. In the opportunities they quietly do not mention when they know you would benefit. In the gentle, almost imperceptible ways they chip at your confidence when you are on the verge of something significant. You have not identified this person yet. And that is precisely why they are still in your life. Machiavelli wrote something that most people find uncomfortable because it disrupts the story they prefer to tell about human relationships. He wrote that men are so simple and so ready to obey present necessities that one who deceives will always find those who allow themselves to be deceived. He was not making a cynical observation about the character of humanity. He was making a precise, forensic observation about the mechanics of how hidden hostility operates. The deceiver succeeds not because the deceived person is stupid. The deceiver succeeds because the deceived person wants to believe what they are being shown. We are trained from childhood to extend trust, to interpret ambiguity charitably, to assume that the people in our lives who say they are for us are actually for us. This is not weakness. In most relationships, in most circumstances, it is the appropriate default. But it is also the mechanism that hidden enemies rely on. Your willingness to believe the best is the first tool they use against you. Today I am going to give you 7 signs. Not 7 vague intuitions. 7 specific, observable, behavioral patterns that Machiavelli identified across the courts of Florence, that modern psychology has since confirmed, and that you can begin applying to the relationships in your life today. Not to become paranoid. Not to treat every person as a threat. But to develop what Machiavelli called the eye of the prince. The ability to see what is actually present rather than what you want to be present. The cost of not developing this ability is not abstract. It is the mentor who guides you carefully in directions that keep you beneath them. It is the colleague who knows about the opportunity before you do and says nothing. It is the friend who listens to your doubts on your worst days and quietly amplifies those doubts to others. It is the person who seems to support you publicly while engineering your failure privately. These people exist. They are probably already in your life. The 7 signs will show you how to find them. There is a word in German that has no direct equivalent in English because most languages prefer not to have a precise term for what it describes. The word is Schadenfreude. It means pleasure derived from the misfortune of others. And psychological research has consistently found that the people who experience Schadenfreude most intensely at your failures are not strangers. They are people who are close to you. People who compare themselves to you. People whose sense of their own value is tied to how they measure against yours. This is sign 1, and it is the most revealing sign of all because it is almost impossible to fully suppress. A genuine ally feels your failure as a partial failure of their own. They are invested in your outcome. When you fall short, they are disappointed alongside you because they were genuinely pulling for you. A hidden enemy feels your failure as a small private relief, as evidence that the world is ordered correctly, as confirmation that you are not actually going to surpass them. Watch for this not in what people say when you fail. Watch for what they do not say. Watch for the flatness in their response when you share bad news. The absence of the urgency to help that a real ally would feel. Watch for the speed with which they move on to other topics, as if your setback requires no real processing, because for them it does not. Watch also for something more subtle. The way their energy shifts slightly when you are in a difficult period. A hidden enemy is often at their most engaged, most warm, most interested in you precisely when things are going badly. Because this is when they feel most comfortable in your presence. Machiavelli observed this pattern in the courts of Florence in specific terms. He wrote that a prince must be extremely cautious about those who come closest during his periods of weakness, because a man who is drawn to you by your difficulty and not by your strength is drawing closer to feed, not to help. The courtier who visits most frequently during the prince's illness and least frequently during his triumph has revealed exactly where his interests lie. The inverse is also true and equally revealing. A hidden enemy often becomes notably less available, less warm, and less engaged when things are going well for you. When you land the promotion. When the business shows early signs of working. When you report that something significant has happened in your favor. Watch the response. Not the words. The words can be managed. Watch the energy behind the words. Watch whether the congratulation reaches the eyes. Watch how long the conversation stays on your good news before being redirected. The person who is genuinely happy for your wins and genuinely pained by your losses is an ally. The person whose emotional pattern runs in the opposite direction has shown you precisely what they are. In 1513, Machiavelli wrote one of the most important warnings in The Prince about the nature of counsel. He wrote that the first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him. But beneath that famous observation is a more specific and more dangerous warning. He wrote that a prince must always take counsel, but only when he wishes and not when others wish. He must discourage everyone from offering advice unless he asks for it. Because men will always seem to counsel you in their own interest unless you are able to compel them otherwise. This is sign 2. And it requires a specific kind of attention that most people do not apply to the advice they receive. When someone close to you offers advice, most people evaluate the advice on its surface. Does it sound reasonable? Does it come from a place of apparent expertise? Does the person seem sincere? These are the wrong questions. The right question is simpler and far more revealing. If I follow this advice, who benefits? A genuine ally gives you counsel that is designed primarily to advance your interests, even when doing so might cost them something. A friend who tells you to negotiate harder for your salary knowing that it might make you more confident and eventually take you to a different organization is giving you real counsel. A mentor who pushes you toward visibility knowing that your success might eventually eclipse their own is giving you real counsel. A hidden enemy gives you counsel that is calibrated to serve their interests while appearing to serve yours. They encourage you to stay in situations that keep you contained. They advise caution at exactly the moments when boldness would help you break through. They recommend the safe path at the crossroads where the risky path leads somewhere they cannot follow. They discourage the relationship that would expand your network into territory they cannot control. And they do all of this in language that sounds exactly like genuine concern for your well-being. The sophistication of this form of hostility is that it is almost entirely deniable. Every piece of advice can be defended on its face. The hidden enemy is not lying exactly. They are selecting from among all possible true things to say exactly those true things whose effect is to limit you. Machiavelli's solution to this was ruthless and practical. He said a prince should ask specific people for counsel on specific matters, listen carefully, decide entirely on his own, and never allow advisors to know how heavily their advice weighs on his decisions. Because the moment an advisor knows they have influence over you, they have a reason to manage that influence in their own interest. Apply this directly. For every significant piece of advice you receive, especially from people close to you, run the second question. Not just is this reasonable, but who does this benefit if I follow it? The answer will not always indicate hostility, but it will sometimes show you things about the advice you were not seeing before. Information about you is currency, and a hidden enemy is always spending it. Not recklessly, not in ways that are obviously traceable back to them, but consistently and strategically, directing the right pieces of information to the right people at the right moments to shape how you are perceived in contexts where you are not present to defend yourself. This is perhaps the most difficult sign to detect because it operates almost entirely in your absence. But there are observable symptoms. The first symptom is finding out that people know things about you that you did not tell them and that should not have traveled to them through any neutral channel. not general information. Specific details. The thing you mentioned once in a private conversation that somehow became known to someone it had no legitimate path to reach. When this happens consistently with one person as the common denominator in every chain of transmission, the pattern has identified itself. The second symptom is reputation damage that has no obvious source. You notice that people in a particular circle seem to have a slightly cooler, slightly more guarded response to you than the facts of your interactions with them would warrant. You have not done anything to these people, but something has been done to their perception of you. This kind of ambient reputation damage is almost always the work of someone with access and motivation. The third symptom is what Machiavelli described as the selective narrator. A person who never lies outright about you but who consistently chooses which truths about you to share and in what context to share them, your failures mentioned without your recoveries, your insecurities described without your strengths, your worst moments in circumstances shared without the context that would make them understandable. This is not lying. It is editing. And the edits all go in the same direction. Machiavelli wrote that words are easy. The prince who trusts a man's declarations of loyalty over the observable pattern of his information behavior is a prince who deserves what comes next. He argued that a man's relationship to information about you is one of the most reliable indicators of his actual position. A genuine ally hoards information about you. He protects your reputation the way he protects his own resources. A hidden enemy spends that information because spending it returns value to him. Audit the information flows in your closest relationships. Where are the consistent leaks? Who is the common element in every chain where something private became known where it should not have? The answer to that question is an answer about much more than information management. Timing is everything in the architecture of hidden hostility. A hidden enemy rarely attacks your confidence in general. General attacks are too visible, too easily identified, too easily defended against. Instead, the hidden enemy has learned to operate with surgical precision. They introduce doubt at exactly the moment when confidence is most required. When you are about to make a move that could change your position significantly, they find a way to remind you of your limitations. You are about to present to the most important room you have ever presented to. In the hours before, someone close to you mentions casually that they heard one of the decision makers is difficult to impress. That someone similar to you tried something similar recently and it did not land the way they hoped. That you might want to reconsider the opening because it seems a little risky. None of this is overtly hostile. None of it is even necessarily untrue. But consider what it does. It plants uncertainty at the exact moment when certainty is the resource you most need. It redirects your attention from preparation to anxiety. It subtly reframes the upcoming event from an opportunity to a threat. Machiavelli identified what he called the poison of well-timed doubt as one of the most effective weapons available to a political opponent. He wrote that a prince's enemies rarely try to stop him from acting. They try to ensure that he acts from a weakened position. A man who enters a negotiation uncertain has already conceded something before the first word is spoken. The pattern to watch for is consistency of timing. One instance of poorly timed discouragement could be coincidence. 2 instances are a pattern worth noting. 3 or more instances where the same person has introduced doubt or complications at exactly the moments requiring your full confidence is a behavioral signature. It is not coincidence. It is method. Pay particular attention to what is said in the hours and days before your significant moments. Before the important meeting. Before the launch. Before the conversation you have been building toward. Who is in those conversations with you? And what is the direction of their influence in those specific windows? The person who consistently, across multiple instances, introduces friction, doubt, or distraction in the window before your critical moments has shown you something about their actual position regardless of what they say their position is. In the courts of Renaissance Italy, one of the most effective strategies for neutralizing a rival without direct confrontation was a technique Machiavelli observed and documented with characteristic precision. The technique was simple. You do not block the rival's path to the prince. You insert yourself into that path. You become the filter through which information, access, and opportunity must travel. And then you manage the filter in your own interest. This is sign 5. And it is operating in modern life with exactly the same mechanics, simply in different contexts. A hidden enemy who has identified that your advancement depends on a particular relationship will find ways to position themselves as an intermediary in that relationship. They become the person who speaks to the decision maker about you before you have the chance to speak for yourself. They become the person who passes along your work with their own framing attached. They become the person who you naturally route your ideas through because they seem connected, seem helpful, seem to have access you do not have yet. And from that position they manage what reaches the other side. Your best ideas arrive stripped of context. Your wins are reported in ways that minimize their significance. Your failures travel faster and further than your recoveries. Your relationship with the person who could actually help you is being carefully managed from a position you did not ask anyone to occupy. The specific sign to watch for is unsolicited intermediation. A genuine ally creates direct connections for you. They introduce you to the person, step back, and let the relationship develop on its own terms. They are not invested in remaining in the middle. A hidden enemy creates connections that route through them. They introduce you to the person in a way that establishes them as the ongoing point of contact. They remain involved in the relationship as a structural feature rather than stepping aside. Machiavelli advised princes to be deeply suspicious of courtiers who seemed eager to manage their relationships with others. A man who needs to remain in the middle of your important relationships is a man who needs to control what those relationships produce. The question is why? If there is someone in your life who consistently routes themselves between you and the people or opportunities that matter most to you, examine that structural position carefully. Ask who benefits from you experiencing that relationship or opportunity through their filter rather than directly. The answer to that question will tell you something important about the role they are actually playing. In video 2 of this series, I talked about information as currency. About how the person who controls information controls the dynamic. In that video, I was talking about your relationship to information about others. This sign is about your relationship to information about yourself. And there is a specific and deeply revealing asymmetry that appears consistently in relationships with hidden enemies. They know a great deal about you. They know your ambitions, your fears, your plans, your weaknesses, your relationship dynamics, your financial situation, your history. They have accumulated this knowledge over time through conversations where you were open, through questions that seemed friendly and interested, through the natural disclosure that happens in relationships you believe to be safe. But consider what you actually know about them. Their real opinions on the things that matter. Their actual financial situation. Their genuine ambitions. Their real fears. Their authentic assessment of the important relationships in their lives. When you examine the exchange carefully, you find that it is profoundly one-directional. You are an open book to them. They are largely opaque to you. This asymmetry is not an accident. It is architecture. Machiavelli wrote about this in military terms that translate directly to personal relationships. He said that a general who allows the enemy to understand his positions, resources, and plans while knowing nothing equivalent about the enemy has already lost the war before it begins. The battlefield is not the problem. The intelligence gap is the problem. A genuine ally makes themselves known to you at roughly the same depth that you make yourself known to them. Real intimacy is symmetrical. Real trust is mutual. Real friendship involves a genuine exchange of vulnerability, of information, of genuine self-disclosure in both directions. A hidden enemy manages this asymmetry deliberately. They ask questions. They listen. They express interest in your situation. They create an atmosphere of safety in which disclosure feels natural. But they do not reciprocate in kind. If you examine what you actually know about them versus what they know about you, the gap will tell you something about the nature of the relationship. Begin now to apply what Machiavelli called the strategic audit of disclosure. In your significant relationships, what do you know about the other person at the level of their genuine fears, actual ambitions, and real vulnerabilities? Compare that to what they know about you. Where the gap is enormous and consistently runs in one direction, you have found a relationship in which the flow of information has been engineered rather than naturally exchanged. This is the final sign, and the one that Machiavelli considered the most dangerous precisely because it is the most difficult to name without appearing paranoid. Because the evidence of this sign is inherently split between what you can see and what you cannot. In every room where you are present, they are your advocate. They agree with your ideas. They validate your decisions. They speak well of your capabilities. They seem, to every external observer and to you yourself, to be firmly in your corner. In every room where you are not present, the picture is different. The private conversations that you are not part of carry a different version of you. The version that emphasizes your limitations when your name comes up in contexts where your advancement is being discussed. The version that introduces the complication, the concern, the reason for hesitation, right at the moment when the people in that room are forming an opinion about you that matters. The version that is not exactly hostile. Not saying anything that could be directly quoted back as a betrayal, but consistently, reliably, introducing just enough doubt to ensure that you do not quite reach the level that would pose a real threat to them. Machiavelli wrote that the most dangerous enemy in a court is not the man who opposes you openly. The man who opposes you openly has told you where he stands, and you can plan accordingly. The most dangerous enemy is the man who is for you in every room where his support costs him nothing and against you in every room where his obstruction benefits him. This man is almost impossible to defend against directly because you cannot point to what he is doing. You can only observe the pattern of outcomes over time. And it is in the pattern of outcomes that this sign becomes visible. Watch not what people say about you in your presence. Watch the pattern of what happens in rooms you were not in. When decisions were made about you without you. When your name came up in contexts that mattered and something about the outcome seemed slightly off from what your actual position and capabilities would warrant. When opportunities seem to consistently miss you in ways that are hard to explain. When people who should know your value somehow seem to have a subtly diminished version of it. Then ask who was in those rooms. Who had access to those conversations, whose presence is the consistent variable in every instance where the outcome was lower than expected. Machiavelli's final counsel on this was among the most direct he ever wrote. He said a prince who discovers a man is two-faced must not confront him, correct him, or give him the opportunity to adjust his performance. He must simply remove him. Without explanation. Without drama. Without giving him the chance to defend the indefensible, because a man who has been operating with two faces has already shown you everything you need to know about what he will do with the third chance you are foolishly considering giving him. 7 signs. Let me name them plainly one final time. They celebrate your failures more than your wins. They give you advice that benefits them. They spread information about you strategically. They undermine your confidence at critical moments. They position themselves between you and your opportunities. They know everything about you but reveal little about themselves. And they support you publicly while undermining you privately. I want to be precise about what I am and am not telling you. I am not telling you that every person in your life who has done one of these things on one occasion is a hidden enemy. People are imperfect. Genuine allies sometimes give self-interested advice without realizing it. Good friends sometimes say the wrong thing at the wrong moment. Real relationships contain moments of imbalance, of poor timing, of information handled carelessly rather than strategically. What identifies the hidden enemy is not a single instance. It is a pattern. It is the consistent, reliable, multi-sign signature of a person whose relationship to you is fundamentally different from what they present. When several of these signs are present in the same person, across multiple contexts, over an extended period of time, you are not dealing with imperfect humanity. You are dealing with something deliberate. Machiavelli's deepest insight on this subject was not tactical. It was philosophical. He argued that the capacity to see people clearly, to perceive the reality of a relationship rather than the performance of it, is not a natural ability. It is a developed skill. Most people never develop it because developing it requires accepting an uncomfortable truth about human nature that is much easier to deny. The uncomfortable truth is this: not everyone who calls themselves your friend is your friend. Not everyone who says they want you to succeed actually wants you to succeed. Some of the people closest to you are in that position specifically because proximity to you gives them something they want, and what they want is not your advancement. This is not cynicism. Cynicism is the refusal to trust anyone based on a generalized assumption about human nature. What I am describing is precision. The ability to distinguish, with increasing accuracy over time, between the people who are genuinely invested in your growth and the people who are invested in managing it. Develop the eye of the prince. Not to become suspicious of everyone, but to become accurate about the specific few who have given you, through their consistent behavior across these 7 signs, all the information you need to make the correct assessment. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And once you cannot unsee it, the appropriate response becomes obvious. Remove them. Not with hostility. Not with confrontation. Simply withdraw the access, the information, the vulnerability, and the trust that they have been using against you. Quietly. Completely. Without explanation. Machiavelli's final word on enemies was not about how to fight them. It was about how to make them irrelevant. A man with no access to your information, no position between you and your opportunities, no presence in the rooms where your future is being shaped, is not your enemy anymore. He is simply someone you used to know. That is the appropriate destination for everyone who has earned a place in this category. The 7 signs have shown you who they are. What you do with that knowledge is now entirely your decision. If you watched this entire video, you have just completed something that most people will never do. You have looked directly at the mechanics of hidden hostility without flinching. You have applied Machiavelli's framework to the actual relationships in your actual life. That is not comfortable. And that is precisely the point: the complete psychology of alliance and enmity, the specific tactical responses to each of these 7 signs, the methods for removing people from your inner circle without creating the kind of conflict that allows them to play the victim. Those are things I cannot fully lay out here. They exist behind the join button for the people who have demonstrated by staying this long that they are serious about this material. Subscribe if you have not. You know who else to think about removing from your life right now. Start there.